The United States says Russia is failing in its war in Ukraine. Top American officials have pledged more military support for their besieged ally, saying they want to see the Russian regime weakened so it can never invade again. Meantime, Moscow has announced a ceasefire in the port city of Mariupol, a possible passage to safety for civilians sheltering at the Azovstal steel plant. We go live to Lviv and Riga in just a moment. First, look at the flurry of diplomatic activity in Kyiv.
A visit shrouded in secrecy. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd met President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on what was supposed to be a clandestine mission to Kyiv over the weekend. It's the highest level visit by U.S. officials to Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion. The pair drove across the border from Poland to Ukraine before taking an 11-hour train ride to Kyiv.
In terms of Russia's war aims, Russia has already failed, and Ukraine has already succeeded because the principal aim that President Putin brought to this, in his own words, was to fully subsume Ukraine back into Russia, to take away its sovereignty and independence. And that has not happened and clearly will not happen.
Despite the security risks, Mr. Blinken says the trip was an opportunity to directly show support to the Ukrainian government. Talks between the two sides went on for 3 hours. Washington has pledged fresh military aid and renewed a diplomatic push in the war-torn country. Mr. Blinken and Mr. Austin has promised to provide more than $300 million in new foreign military financing. The U.S. will also sell $165 million worth of ammunition to Kyiv.
We want to see Ukraine remain a sovereign country, a democratic country able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. We believe that they can win if they have the right equipment, the right support.
On the diplomatic front, Washington says American diplomats will be back in Ukraine later this week. President Biden will also announce his pick for the next U.S. ambassador to the country.
Сьогодні в Києві в такий дуже відповідальний, важливий момент для нашої держави. Дуже дякуємо, що Сполучені Штати Америки дійсно допомагають Україні. Хочу подякувати і від себе особисто подякувати президенту Байдену за його особисту підтримку України.
The U.S. says there'll be more detailed talks about what Ukraine needs to win the war against Russia at a meeting in Germany tomorrow.
John Gambrell joins us live from Lviv. John, several attacks this morning in Ukraine targeting rail and fuel depots. What does this mean for the conflict?
Well, it's very interesting. What we've seen so far is several attacks that targeted rail infrastructure in Ukraine, in central Ukraine, as well as western Ukraine around Lviv, where we are. And we've also seen a fuel depot attacked in central Ukraine. This is important because fuel obviously allows the Ukrainian military to continue their operations against the Russian military. And rail has become very important, both moving people, as we saw U.S. Secretary Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd move by train in and out of Ukraine over the last 24 hours. Rail is also important for moving cargo as well as people out of the conflict area.
John, in other news, of course, Russia announcing a ceasefire at the Mariupol steel plant, ostensibly to allow those who have been hiding there to leave safely. What is the latest there that you know of?
Well, satellite photos recently taken show that facility has seen a tremendous amount of violence. There's gaping holes in the ceilings of this steel plant. There's impact craters in soccer fields and on residential buildings surrounding the area. This is because these several thousand civilians as well as fighters have holed up inside this facility, which has deep underground bunkers that allows it to withstand airstrikes. And as long as they continue to be in the steel works, that forces Russia's military to continue to try to either besiege or attack the facility, and that means that Moscow can't move those troops to other locations in eastern Ukraine. That buys the Ukrainians more time to rearm and re-equip, and the longer that the Russians are there, the more that affects their operations in eastern Ukraine.
In fact, John Gambrell speaking to us there from Lviv.
Will Denslow joins us live now from Riga in Latvia. Will, Russia has gone from demanding the surrender of Ukrainian soldiers at the steel plant in Mariupol to sealing it off. Now it says it wants this ceasefire. So do we know why Moscow is constantly changing its plan?
Well, Dawn, we've had some lines out of the Ministry of Defence in Russia so far, and they've essentially said that they want to see this ceasefire to allow civilians to leave that particular plant in Mariupol. They say there is nothing stopping them as far as the Russians are concerned from these civilians to leave, except their claims that Ukrainians are using them, these civilians, as human shields. They say that they demand that the authorities in Kyiv allow them to give the orders to see the civilians released. We are hearing a very different message from those officials in Kyiv already this Monday. We've heard from Ukraine's Ukraine's deputy prime minister, who's come out and says that, quote, "We are ready when it comes to opening up those humanitarian corridors." However, the message so far is that there are no agreements that a humanitarian corridor to allow these civilians that have been facing consistent bombardment from these reports we're hearing on the ground to be allowed safe passage. There have been reports coming out over the past few hours, few days from out of Ukraine, from Mariupol, that say that civilians are saying they're under constant shelling. So, of course, that seems to be a huge discrepancy from what we're hearing between the messages coming out of Moscow and Kyiv. Dawn?
Well, indeed. And meantime, Moscow says that it wants to discuss this situation around Mariupol with the UN chief, Antony Guterres, when he arrives in the Russian capital. Look, the Secretary General has had no major diplomatic role in this war to date. But is Russia hosting him a small positive sign, perhaps, towards diplomatic efforts to end this war?
It's certainly an opportunity for a degree of mediation, perhaps at least an opportunity for messages to be relayed from Moscow to Kyiv, considering the fact that the Secretary General is travelling both to Moscow and Kyiv this week, as far as we're led to believe. We've heard from Ukraine's deputy prime minister urging the Secretary General, Antony Guterres, to do more when it comes to coming back to Kyiv with guarantees that a humanitarian corridor out of Mariupol can be secured, also requesting him to have UN members of the Red Cross as part of that humanitarian convoy effort as well, to essentially be more of a security that safe passage can be secured. There have been, according to some reports, some NGOs that have said that Secretary General Guterres' previous efforts to start a dialogue with the Kremlin have been rebuffed in the past. So the fact that he is meeting in Russia could be seen as perhaps some progress, that at least a dialogue can be open. Of course, the Secretary General has been incredibly critical of Russia's role consistently, really, since Russia's invasion back in February. So what is seen as, while he has very much had a minimal role, there is hopes as far as the UN is concerned going forwards as to their role is what they can do when it comes to allowing more humanitarian support. There's a huge UN presence in Ukraine. The hope is that more can be done for the UN to secure more passage of aid to get around the country, and of course those humanitarian corridors.
Will, thank you for that. Will Denslow there in Riga.